Dr. Jim Terrell, and I wrote a book called The Sceret According to Jesus. No one is left behind. And I wrote this book for some very specific reasons. You see, I've been studying Jesus and religion and philosophy for over 30 years, and I've been a minister for over 23 years. And the thing that always fascinates me about Jesus is that so many people have sort of put him aside, separated themselves from him, see him as sort of an exception, but not the example. And I really wanted to write a book that would help you see Jesus as an example of how to live your life. And so, are you ready to redefine your relationship with God? Are you ready to see Jesus from love? And are you ready to learn what Jesus really said? Now, the universe, I contend, has a secret. And that secret is relatively simple, but it's really different than other religions and other points of view. First of all, there is no separation. Now, I know for a lot of people that sounds strange because you've been told all your life, God's over here, you're over here, and there's this vast chasm between you and God. I don't believe that's true. I also believe that God does not make junk. That means every form of creation, no matter what it looks like, is some representation of the perfect idea that God has in mind. And we may not act perfectly, but that doesn't mean that there isn't perfection within us. And number three, no one is left behind. That concept's important because I wanted you to really understand that when people get scared because they don't know if they're going to go to heaven or not go to heaven, there is no heaven to go to because there is just this place in consciousness and mind, this beingness of life that is heaven on earth. And irrespective of the form it takes, you are always in that heaven. There is no separation. It's really important you know that. So I also believe that there are some basic ideas that are different than other religions teach. Number one, God is not external to your being. I don't believe that God is external. I believe God's an internal idea. Number two, you are in God, and God is in you. Now that's really important to know that you are in God, and God is in you. It's like a fish being in the water. You can't see the water, but you know it's there. And you know it's supporting you, it's uplifting you. And as Winston Churchill once said, a rising tide lifts all ships. Number three, God does not play favorites. That's important to know too, because then you know that God is not a tribal God, but a universal idea. Number four, God does not punish you for making mistakes. Number five, you've never been separate from God. And number six, you cannot be left behind. Now, those are the basic concepts that are in the book. Now let me review the chapters as I wrote them in the book. The first chapter is a conversation with Jesus. And that's basically where I have some basic questions about how life works, how you build trust, how you understand how the universe works, and how the law of attraction works. The second chapter is Jesus' 10 powerful teachings. And the first teaching is perhaps the most difficult, at least I think it is. It's the one that says, love your enemies. And it goes on. I'll be reviewing those in a little bit. The third one is Jesus and the Great Prayer. That Lord's Prayer, that beautiful document. What does it really mean? And the next one is 7 keys to unlocking your life. And I really do give you that these keys are right there. And if you mentally get them, you can unlock a life and reveal yourself as being this magnificent of God's creation. The next one is the law of attraction. It's a real thing. And it's always working at the human level of what we believe. And the next one is forgiveness and gratitude. Perhaps the 2 most important things you have to learn how to do. And then there is no one is left behind, where I do make my case that the fact that because Spirit is universal, that God is universal, there is not only no one left behind, everyone advances. And the next chapter was questions and answers about heaven, hell, and Jesus, and then affirmations of love based on Paul's Corinthians statement about love, and then finally a consideration, a kind of a prologue, if you will, a wrap-up of the basic ideas of the book. Now, a lot of people say, well, where do you get these crazy ideas that are so different than other people? Well, for the last 30 years, even when I studied Jesus as a child in Sunday school, I never believed that Jesus honestly thought that he was different from others. I believed that he knew that he was the example of that perfect idea that everyone was capable of. And so in 1993, when I read this book called The 5 Gospels, I was amazed that there was a whole group of academic people who had studied Jesus in various seminaries and some of the most prestigious universities in America, who had come up with a book called The 5 Gospels. Now, the reason they call it The 5 Gospels is not only did they consider Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John to be legitimate stories about Jesus, but they also included the Gospel of Thomas. That Gospel of Thomas, I'll tell you where that came from later. But then they wrote down the Gospels according to how they think Jesus would have said these things on the street. And then they voted. They actually voted, and they color-coded what Jesus is reported to have said. And this is the way it turned out. If it's in red, that's Jesus. No mistaking. But they could only agree on 3% of what he is actually reported to have said that they think he actually said. Then they put in pink things that said, sure, sounds like Jesus. Then they put in gray, well, maybe. And then they put in black things that were reported to have been said by Jesus, but they believe there's been some mistake here. And that was the part that really fascinated me, because in those parts where Jesus is self-referential, I am the way, I am the light, that kind of stuff, many of them just didn't believe he ever said that. And I never believed it either. But I do believe that he did say something more along the lines of the way I am, meaning the spiritual, deep connection with God. That was the way I am, and that's the way to understand life and how it works spiritually. Now, I've gone over the basic concept. You have an idea of why I wrote the book. In the next installment, I'm going to be going over that conversation with Jesus and basic concepts that you can use to live your life. Thanks.
Sometimes I need to stop when life has made things hard. Take a breath and remind myself of the truth that's in my heart. What I think and how I am is a choice that I can make. Break the wall of confusion. What I want is there to take. Blessings in my life are easy to forget. Giving into the ignorance and soaking in regret. Gratitude can heal, bring joy into my life. Help me see the truth, my heart and soul unite. Have that gratitude, have that gratitude, have that gratitude. Gotta have that gratitude. Take a look around.